Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and hands-on learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. My name is Sylvan and I will be your host. Today we're here in Bern and have a chat with serial entrepreneur Michael Friedrich. Michael studied at the EPFL in Lausanne and already created 2 successful exits. Today we'll talk about how he started his first company as an underage teenager and also won a fight against the big corporate company Swisscom when doing so. Of course, we talk about his second venture that he sold for more than 12 million Swiss francs. And we also talk about his current project, his current startup, and all about his plans and about a potential future M&A deal or an IPO. Michael is a very inspiring entrepreneur, very driven and passionate about doing what he's actually doing. And I think there are many stories that we can cover and learn from him. So let's get this episode started. Before we get started with the episode, I would like to introduce you to SBB Startup. If you think that your company is a good fit for the Swiss Railways, get in touch with them or learn more about their startup programs at sbbstartup.com. Michael, a very warm welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. Thank you for your time and it's great to have you here today.
Thanks, I'm excited.
I would like to start with the first question right away. You created 2 successful exits, the second one for more than 12 million Swiss francs. Should creating an exit always be the goal when you start a company?
No, I think the goal should be to bring the product to the market, to fulfill its mission and purpose of the product. And yes, you then need to create a decent return for your investors. That's part of it, but that does not have to be an exit necessarily. It's a nice one if it turns out well, but it's not mandatory.
What would be the other good alternatives?
The other good alternative would be to build the company and to pay back the investors through dividends. Nice. And returns that they create.
You started your first venture, Burn Bite Bears, already when you were still an underage teenager. It was a software engineering company and you started it in 1999. Where did this entrepreneurial spirit come from? Was your family background that sort of shaped you because your father was a dentist and also sort of self-employed, but not building a big tech company? Where did that motivation to start a company come from?
I think it was a nature of the time we were in at the time. It was mid-90s that we started it at the age of 16. And computers became abundant, but computers were still new to many of the older generation at the time. And we, the young generation, adopted those technologies very rapidly and was hence able to provide value to the older generation with IT skills. And that was very exciting because you could do things at home with very little upfront investment and were able to produce results that other people were willing to pay money for. Mm-hmm. There was no machine that you had to buy or no long-term investments that you had to make. You really tried things out at home, and if they worked, you could sell them. Nice. And that was really great.
So sort of the entry barriers got so small that you could even start a company as an underage teenager.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's at the end it's not that complicated. And these were with a computer in your bedroom. That's all you needed to get it started, and then a network of people who were like-minded and with whom you could do it together. Absolutely. Doing it alone is always not the same.
Who were your co-founders at Burn Bite Bears?
One was a classmate of mine who brought me to the group, and the other group that was actually the core group was from another school, and they met at the sports competition, at an orienteering competition, and that's just how the people met and discovered that they had the same eagerness to build and try new things, and that's how it started.
I can imagine that if you're just trying things out as a teenager, you play with the technologies and so on. At what level or at what point did you then actually decide to start a company together and also get into business? Because these are still 2 pretty different things, right?
Yeah, the business idea was actually triggered by the friends, the other peers in the group. Mm-hmm. That had good relationships to people from the healthcare industry or from IT industry, telecom industry at the time, and they then actually started it. And I was surfing that wave, working with them and discovering that world. So it was clearly their merits to having started that.
Cool. And what was the first product that you actually sold to people, or was it really customized?
The first products that start, I actually don't really remember. There was a software program for a hospital. There were websites being programmed. The big project that I did, but that was not paid for, was the whole IT tool for my dad's dentist practice, the whole patient management and billing and thing. That was a big one, which was required to do at the time because the tool he used was not ready for the Y2K, the year 2000 issue, that good old days. That's when I stepped up and said, let me do that. The one that ultimately allowed us to earn money was this platform to compare tariffs of phone companies and internet service providers and parcel delivery services. And that started because of a mandate for CompuServe at the time, a company that the young generation doesn't know anymore.
No. What did they do? Was it a telecom company?
It was a telecom company, an internet service provider.
Okay. Yeah. And then you sort of got a contract from them to work with them?
We did a comparison for them for internet dial-ups, and that is how it then started to develop into its own tool. And at the time in '98, until I believe it was '98, Swisscom was still the only player in town for phones, be that mobile or landlines. And then the market was, I think it was 97 or 98, opened up. And as part of that new competition that entered the space, there was a need for consumers to compare prices. And that is how we then started to offer those tools, and also how a few months later, Comparis started to offer their comparison services.
One also big challenge if you start a company as an underage teenager is you actually need someone to sign your legal paperwork, right? Yeah. How did you handle this?
Here as well, we had a great a teacher, Thomas Brönnimann, who was a teacher at the Lebermatt-Gymnasium, where my friends Mark and Lucas Andre were. And he actually discovered them, they met during IT classes. And he then encouraged the entrepreneurial behavior and supported it, and was then also the president of the association. And then ultimately also was a partner in the company that we created.
Nice.
Yeah.
You already mentioned Comparis. We will talk about the competitive story in the second episode. But you also then decided at a certain point that you sell your company to Comparis. What were the reasons there, and how did that happen?
We were 20. We wanted to go to study, and we wanted to hand that over to someone who would take care of it and give us a good return.
Right.
To finance
this
part of
process
our studies.
Was driven by you because you said, hey, we actually don't have the time to take care of it anymore, or was Comparis actually also contacting you?
No, that was a decision that was taken by the team, that we wanted to hand it over and focus on our studies. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
We were competitors for a few years, and we then thought that they might be a good potential acquirer for us, willing to become the only player in Switzerland to offer those types of services. And
And how did you actually go about that? Because usually it can also be the other way around, that they say, hey, we are actually interested in buying you, and they get your intention to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
How did you drive this process? What did you do?
That was very innocent at the time. We had a couple of, we called them angels, business angels, that all had 4-digit amounts of money invested, so very little. We had them in because of their experience and network. And in discussions with some of them, we thought that reaching out to Comparis would be a good one. And they then also supported us in that process.
Okay.
It was all very, very innocent at the time. And it was different times as well for these types of transactions.
Sure. And how did you actually come up with the price tag? What was the how did you develop the understanding what a fair price is?
That was a shocking thing for me, because we were just on the train and discussed going into the meeting, and then someone thought, we should maybe also have a price in mind. And then we just, there was just numbers coming up, and we felt, okay, this might be too much, this might be too little, this might be approximately right, so let's just propose that.
Okay, what were your sort of reference points there? Did you look at the investments you got or the revenue that you made?
No, it was just gut feeling.
Okay.
What could be a fair price.
And what was your number that you came up?
We decided not to disclose that at the time.
Fair point.
Yeah.
And then you actually successfully sold the company and then focused on your studies.
Then we had a service level agreement as well with them. So we supported the products for a while. And one of our employees, actually the only one who was full-time on it, the journalist, he then also joined the Comparis team and was their telecom expert for, I believe, almost 15 years, Ralph Baylor, and he was with them for a long time. And so that was, we ensured that the product was continue to be supported, and that was also one way to structure the payout a little bit.
How did that feel, selling your company in your early 20s, your first one?
Very normal, nothing special.
Although it's a highly extraordinary thing to happen at that young age.
I think when you're in it, it's all much more natural because it's your reality and you're inside that.
Right.
And so you don't perceive it as something special. And we were agnostic enough to the fact that we knew that this was not going to be the company that we wanted to spend our lives in. Sure. So separation anxiety was non-existent. Yeah. And we were just, it felt like a natural wrap up of high school.
Okay. Yep. Like time for the next chapter, basically.
Exactly. That's also why, that was also the motivation to get the transaction started.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then later on, you co-founded your next venture, Imago.
Yeah.
And prior to that, you also you studied at microengineering at the EPFL in Lausanne.
Yeah.
And Imago is a medical device startup that's basically visualizing blood flow in real time.
Yeah.
In what way has your education background also enabled you or shaped you to pursue the next entrepreneurial venture?
The university itself didn't shape my entrepreneurial spirit, to be clear. But what it gave me was a good overview of a lot of different disciplines in engineering and life sciences, good enough to understand all the building blocks that are required from a technical side to put a product together. Mm-hmm. And that is very useful when you need to lead a team, because it's always about matching customer needs with regulatory boundaries, with technical possibilities, and to shape that together and to understand that when you twist it on one end, what the implications are going to be for all the other aspects, including financials, and so the studies were good because they gave me a solid technical understanding, good enough that I get a good sense for what is possible and what is not possible in each specialty. Yeah. And then I need to rely on really good engineers to make it happen.
If I'm not mistaken, there's also a link to your first venture with your co-founder that followed you, right?
Marc-André, I was able to get him attracted to, he did ETH at Zurich, electrical engineering, and we finished more or less at the same time. And then I asked him when, again, Imago didn't start out myself. I was not the one who asked. It was the professor at the time for whom I worked after my studies for a few months, who at the end of my stage d'assistant asked me if I wanted, that he had patent, and asked me if I wanted to build the company with him. And I was very intrigued by that, and knew that I needed someone that could make it happen from a technical perspective. And that is where the first and only call went to Mark. And I asked him, he was the CTO already in the previous one, asked him to join, and was able to get him as part of the founder team.
Nice. What makes you a strong co-founder team, or ask differently, what are the important characteristics of a good co-founder team from your perspective?
Complementarity, I think, that you can cover as many different domains as possible that you need to be mastering to run the business. Mm-hmm. But it's not mandatory to manage or to have everything in-house when you start. Okay. You can also attract talent later on when the time is right.
Yeah. And how did you go about that? Like, what was crucial from your end to have in-house at the beginning, and what was less crucial?
At Imago, the most crucial knowledge to have in-house was really good engineering skills to make the product happen. And there was a lot of electronics and software and firmware involved, and so the natural choice was Mark.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And You already have previous work experience, basically, and do you think that this is a huge advantage, that if you already share several years of working together when you actually found a company?
Yeah, it helps on both sides. It helps on the trust, and with Mark specifically, that I knew exactly how strong he is, and that I could fully rely and delegate all those aspects to him. And the work experience in itself is also very useful, or more the entrepreneurial experience, because without that prior good experience during my high school times, I probably would not have dared to build, to lead a new company myself. I would have probably more tried to go and join a larger organization instead of knowing that you can also do something yourself, and that it is manageable and fun to do it yourself.
And I also find it pretty interesting to talk about the way that you actually started the company, because great technologies emerge from good universities every now and then you can basically try to commercialize that, right, and build a business around that. How did that feel for you? Like, you didn't start the company yourself, or you didn't come up with the idea, let's put it that way, also with the first company, with the Bird by Bears. How do you actually, get into these roles, or can you find these opportunities? How do you go about that?
I was never looking for them.
Okay.
They ended up in on my desk somehow. And you interestingly said all those great technologies. None of those original technologies that came out of university actually were the ones that survived into the final product.
Very interesting.
It's just the at the beginning, it's always very technology driven, but it just puts you onto a certain track to look for a market need, and usually it's at the beginning, it's a strong technology push, because you firmly believe, now this time it's really a technology that is going to make it. But then over the years you discover that it's actually not the right one, and that other technologies are actually better. But it puts you into the thinking of really dedicating a lot of time and energy to that potential unmet need.
So would you say that it's still a good idea to start with the technology and not with a problem or a market need, and then finding a solution for that? I know this also depends a bit on the area that you operate your business in.
Very much. I think it's a very fortunate situation if the technology is already quite close, because the fact that you have technology allows you usually to get patents. And having patents to get seed money at the beginning is very useful, because then you can tell your investors, oh, it's protected, even though you know that most likely these patents are going to be worth less after a few years, because you find another technology that is more suitable. But you need to get started somewhere. And if you just start with a unmet need, it's a whole different exercise, because if you start with an unmet need, you need to do a much more different approach with technology scouting, and then you really don't know where to start. And when you do technology scouting, it's sometimes I think it's actually more difficult to then be able to assess which technology is going to make it for your need. And when you already have a starting block somewhere, also the need you can focus on a slightly different variant of the need with a slightly different technology, but then all of a sudden it makes sense.
So you can basically tweak it in a better way, because your direction is more clear.
You have some foundation to start with, yeah. But then even the market need, that once you dive into it, you discover that there's really different drivers that are relevant once you're a few years in. And so if you just from a very abstract point of view say, oh, this is a need, now I need a solution, I think I would be quite overwhelmed with that. This is very complicated.
And you also mentioned the investors, and that patents can actually help you closing seed money.
Yeah.
Although you already know that these patents will basically not be relevant in the future.
At that time, you don't know that.
Okay, yeah.
But
you would assume it now with your experience, probably, right?
Now you would assume that it is a likely scenario, but then again, you start somewhere. And then it's a lot of iterations and a lot of pivoting, as people call it, that leads you to the end. And many times along that way, you hit walls, and sometimes you don't see them coming. Sometimes you have a sense that they might be there, and that's just part of it.
And still for investors, it's very important to sort of also have, some guarantees or some security in the investment, and a patent is very much signaling that, right?
A patent helps because the patent helps. Why does it help? A patent, essentially, if granted, gives you some sort of protection that over the next 20 years, you might be able to exploit that commercial opportunity. And it's much better than having nothing. So you want to get started somewhere, even though seed investing is very risky. Many of the initial seed investments don't result in returns. That's part of it.
Yeah. Still, what would you suggest or recommend to entrepreneurs that might build a software startup where you cannot get any patents, for example?
Yeah, in software, I think it's much more important to have good KPIs and good traction.
Okay.
And make sure that you have enough momentum to become the relevant player, because it's so, you can talk about copyright in software as much as you want, but at the end of the day, what counts is your user base most of the time.
Yeah. User base is one KPI. Are you thinking about other specific KPIs that people with software startups should focus on from your perspective?
It's obviously great if you can create some sort of revenue. That always helps.
Yes,
that always helps.
I think there's a famous quote from Mark Cuban. He basically says, "Revenue cures it all, no matter what it is."
That's exactly the point, and that's also the case with more deep tech ventures. Again, you find another need for which you then find another solution, but as long as it works out, it's good. Yeah.
Then in 2014, you sold the company for 12.5 million Swiss francs. We will cover how you actually got there in the second episode, because this is a very also competitor-driven story. Yeah. And I would still like to talk about how did that actually feel. You said it wasn't too special for you when you sold your first company, but now selling a second company for $12.5 million or Swiss francs, which is equal at the moment, is quite a different story. Did that feel any different to you?
No, I was
not at all.
No, I was just glad that it was over. It didn't. The numbers become quite abstract at one point in time.
Okay.
I was happy that it was done, but then again, even 2 months before we closed the transaction, I was already looking for a new thing. It's like an addiction.
Okay. So there was also no big party that you did after the closing or anything like that?
No, actually not. But it was as we will discuss in the second episode, it was quite a hard fight to get there. And so people are just overall relieved. And I'm the type of guy who's then looking for a next challenge. That's just personality.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not really too much enjoying the moment, but already looking for the next one, basically.
I was glad that it took place.
Yes.
Was certainly happy that it worked out at the end. Mm-hmm. But again, it's not like at that point, at least, there was no desire for a huge celebration. It was just good that we got everyone some sort of return.
Sure.
And everyone was happy, and I was focusing on convincing those investors who earned money with Imago that they were keeping the money that they earned earmarked for the next venture.
Good story.
Yeah.
What did you actually personally do with the money that you made?
I put all in the new one. Pretty hardcore.
No surprise after that story, I guess.
Pretty hardcore. Yeah.
Before you actually started the next one then, or joined the next one, better said, you also worked at the acquiring company at Novadac for almost 1.5 years.
That was essentially just on paper. I was just employed. I got a salary, but I worked maybe 30 hours over that 1 year. Okay. So that was just part of the deal. Usually when you structure such a transaction, the acquirer wants the know-how of key people to be staying on board. Mm-hmm. And that was what I signed up for. And I was then focusing my efforts on transferring knowledge to them, and there wasn't so much that that needed to be transferred.
Okay, so you basically didn't really have an operation role involved.
No,
anymore.
I actually didn't want that.
I can imagine.
I didn't. I wanted to do something else. Yeah. And again, they were our competitors at the time, and I was good without working for them too much.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know if you are able or willing to share other numbers there or just give us a hint, but I would also be interested in how these deals actually look like when you then start working for the company that buys your company. Are these like market salaries? Is it higher? Is it lower?
It's market salary.
Okay.
Yeah, but typically you can get a good package, or part of a normal trade sale is that you can then also negotiate a relatively good package to stay on. Here, because we forced them to buy us, there was a bit less empathy on their side to give me a good package, which is also then resulted in me looking for other things. So that's but then we'll cover that later on.
Yeah, but I think that will be a nice story to hear. Then, as you already mentioned, you were looking for the next thing. So you also joined a company called Distal Motion that you actually joined first as an investor and then later on as CEO with an operational involvement.
I met Distal Motion in March 14, 2 months before the closing. The reason why I met them is I was invited to join the jury for Venture Leaders Boston at the time. And I really liked that. And then I went to Reto Hartman, my coach, CTI coach at the time, and told him, so which one of those 20 companies that are going to Boston should I join? And then he said, oh, well, I have another one that you would like more. And he then introduced me to Distal Motion that he was coaching as well at the time. And I knew they told me that they were looking for money. So I said, yeah, I'll bring you my money and bring you the money of my investors under the condition that I have a board seat and become CEO. And that was then, we discussed that for a few months and then they accepted and we invested. And let the second financing round put in like 3.5 million or so. Me taking over the board seat and the CEO role as part of that package.
So for you, it was very important to also be invested, not only operationally involved, but also invested with a potential upside, I guess.
I was not looking for a job. I was looking for something more.
And what was especially appealing to you when you looked at Distal Motion?
The competitive landscape that it was in or is in still is not that far away from what we had at Imago, similar companies, and the logic there as well to go into with Imago, we actually started a market from scratch, which was very difficult because you have to educate your surgeons and nurses and payers about the value of the product that you want to bring to market and do a lot of clinical work, market development that is extremely costly. And that was one of the reasons why we then had to sell Imago, because that would have required much too much money to do that ourselves. In Distal Motion or in the robotic surgery world, the market is different. There is already one player out that is hugely successful, Intuitive Surgical, with by now 3.5 billion in sales and a 54 billion market cap just from those robots. And we knew that we had a better solution for that, but that there was no need to educate surgeons or hospital administrators about the fundamental value of robotics. The only thing that needed to be explained was why we are different and why we are better. And so that is a much easier sale and requires much less market education than if you start in a market from scratch. And because I knew that space already and I really liked that competitive play, I felt that this was a very intriguing place to go in. And it's a big market, it's growing strongly, big players want to move in, so there's a good dynamics that can be played.
And I guess there were also other characteristics that were important to you, like team, for example.
I like the team, but that was not my primary rationale to go in at the time.
It was at least a market opportunity that you saw there.
It was more from an investor perspective. And that is also why I wanted to have the CEO role, because I wanted to shape the evolution of the company.
Very nice.
The team was a good team at the time. They did. I'm very grateful for their for what they did. That they had this idea and the courage to start and to succeed in the first financing round. Yes. That is always a easily underestimated achievement and a really good job. We then later on decided to buy them out, which is fine as well. So without them, I would not have had the opportunity to be in that space. So,
but this can also be a very tricky decision, I can imagine, and also execution on top of it. If you actually want to buy out an existing team or existing management team or founding team.
Yes, and you only do that if there is a need, because it absorbs a lot of energy, and you need to find money to pay for them.
Right.
Usually, when you have new money coming in, new investors want to invest their money into growing value.
Absolutely.
And it's obviously very hard to explain why they should pay other shareholders to leave, because then they're already in a situation where they say, well, wait, there is a problem here. So why should I bring money for that? And gratefully, or fortunately, we had an existing investor who understood that. He's a very successful entrepreneur himself, who then understood the need and stepped up and offered money. And that is how we could then offer the main founder there, who had almost 90% of the founder shares, a buyout, and that allowed for a nice separation. He can do what he's really good at, and we can develop and shape the slow motion the way we want to shape it.
I mean, this is also, you hear that quote all the time that, certain founders also sort of grow out of their role depending the stage that the startup is in. But I can imagine in practice, this is not too easy to realize or to then actually also make the necessary changes. How did you find out that this was the necessary step to take?
Again, I don't like the notion of growing out of their role. I think people have unique capabilities.
Right.
But when you build a business, so typical tech founder, they start with a PhD, so a very academic track, and they need to then pivot through all the other stages of seed founder, building up a company with 3 people, then growing it, becoming a real business, getting real money in, going to market, and that is a huge change of direction. And sometimes people that are really geniuses in their inventor world, that is so needed for us to build companies, they are best placed there, and they should stay there. And it takes time. A separation always involves 2 parties. That's the nature of a separation. It takes time for both parties to realize that, and to then find a solution that is good for both of them. And the way we did that is another entrepreneur, about the same age as I am, also from Lausanne. He's a small investor in Digital Motion. He knew both the founder and me very well, and he then suggested the mediation process, and that then ultimately led to the separation.
Do you think that this is something other companies should also consider when they go through a similar experience?
The thing is, you can consider it as much as you want. The most important ingredient is that you find some money to pay the founder. Right. And in most cases, unfortunately, there is no money available to do such a buyout. But if there is a way to find that money, it's definitely a worthwhile discussion to have.
Okay.
But it doesn't make sense to have the discussion first, and then mentally you're already separated, but you have still no money to buy the other party out.
I guess like these discussions could also end in the closure of a business.
Oh yeah, that happens. Or that people need to leave, are still shareholders, and then in every financing round, every time you need to update the agreements, you need to have a fight with them. But that is a lot. That is where you waste a lot of energy, both as a founder who leaves, because again, emotionally you can't move on, and as a company, because you're always held hostage by someone who is not happy. And
I think I also heard companies where it was slightly different. They realized that they were in such a situation and just realized, hey, we need to change something in order to make it work better. But then the leading founder was still at least partly or even fully participating on the shares of the company.
Yeah.
Was that also a discussion point from you? Because you seem to be very clear that either you are fully in it or you don't have any shares at all.
No, every situation is different. Here we had the fortunate situation that we had an existing investor who put in the money, that makes things just cleaner. The next best alternative would have been to separate ourselves from him on an employment level, but still have his shares. But this would have been hugely painful, and I think then it becomes a very individual discussion, and every founder is different as well. Sure. So for some people, it's easier to let go. Others have more affection to their invention. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that there is a universal rule. But what is universal is that you want to make sure that as a company, whatever the size it is, everyone pulls in the same direction.
Sure. Yeah.
That is very important.
Yeah.
And when you have people fighting against you, or when you have infighting, that can break the neck of any business.
Yeah. It's also a huge distraction.
Huge, yeah. And that because it's not low-ranking employees who handle that. It's the management and the board, and they should be doing different things.
Yeah, and I mean, building a company is even hard enough, but then if you all pull together in the same direction, that's even hard enough then. Yeah. But then if you also have internal disagreements and so on, then it gets even more difficult.
So in the meantime, we have bought out 2 other investors, or one seed investor and one Series A investor, with whom we were not on the same page, and we bought back their shares, and they're out, and that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What I also find interesting is over and over again, you got interesting deals or interesting opportunities on your table, mainly, if I understood that correctly, through your network or people that you knew from university, investors, other people from the startup ecosystem. Did you do anything special to sort of build a strong network or relationship with other people, or is that something that you didn't pay attention to at all?
No, it was not something I did consciously. Okay. It somehow happened either through I don't know if it's my personality, I don't know why, but I'm not the one who goes to hundreds of networking events and tries to have a huge and actively managed business network. That's not my type.
Okay.
And that is where all the ingredients come into play, including luck.
Sure.
Yeah.
And where did then the contacts actually emerge from? Just from events that you might still have seen each other, or when you were?
So the first one with Burn by Bears, that started in 8th grade at the school orienteering event, where I met someone who became one of the classmates and co-founders of Burn by Bears, and he met the others from Le Vermont also at an orienteering event. So that's just coincidence. Yeah. Or maybe not coincidence, maybe it's shared interests, more importantly. So we were all into IT at the time, mm-hmm. and that is how you connect, and that is when you then meet with other people who wanted to do things in IT or did things in IT, and then it created a certain dynamics. And then the Martin, Lucas, Andre, they had, from the very get-go, they had huge professionalism also from a business perspective, and they were the ones who then led it, and we were just surfing along and learning from them. Great. And after my studies to start Imago, during my studies, I was leading a team to build a solar-powered race car, which didn't work out because we didn't get the money for many reasons. And the project stopped maybe 2 months before I handed in my master's thesis. And we had like 20 or so people working on it, so it was relatively large. So I said, okay, let's just finish my thesis. And then I didn't know what to do, so I was offering to a friend of mine who did a PhD at EPFL to do some programming for him, because I felt the way he was doing his programs or image acquisition for his research was not efficient, and that is how I went there and worked for him as a summer job. Mm-hmm. And then it's through that work that I met with that professor who was the head of that lab, and then we got to know each other, and at the end, when I wanted to leave, he offered that to me.
Great. So be open to opportunities, try things out.
Yeah, just try and go. And it always involved, reflecting on it a bit, it always involved me trying things and then meeting other people who try things, and then it's a bit of a randomness involved.
Yeah, and then you suddenly end up at the right place at the right time, right?
Yeah, that's somehow how it worked out so far.
Cool.
Yeah.
Before we end up and wrap up this episode, I have 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
Are there any favorite tools or gadgets that you use yourself on a regular basis?
My mobile phone.
Sure, classic.
I learned that after maybe 20 years, I concluded that tools are less important than just getting things done.
Yeah.
And so I stopped looking for great tools and great project management tools or great whatever. It's just because you can waste so much time in tools.
And the work doesn't
get done either. So just I try to be focusing more on having less emails in my backlog and less work that is not done because I'm looking for tools to make them more efficiently.
Makes sense. Yeah. Last question for today. Are there any additional resources like books, blogs, podcasts, or so on that you yourself listen to on a regular basis or consume on a regular basis that you can recommend to others?
I'm actually the full opposite of these types of people. I'm a very easily distracted when it comes to reading these types of books or blogs. I read newspapers a lot to know what is going on in the world, and that's about it.
Okay.
There are other people that are much more out there looking for great books, and the only way I probably read books is through these Get Abstract summaries, because that's about the attention span I have.
And also sounds way more efficient.
It is, and because at the end of the day, it's all about it's all about daring to ask the very basic questions. It's the very basic, reasonable instincts that make you successful. It's like daring to ask, so does that product really work? Or who will really want to pay for that? It's these things that when you are too academic, you don't dare to ask because it feels like it's a too easy question. You need to sound more intelligent. But what I've learned from also my investors that are successful entrepreneurs is to focus on the basics, but to really understand them and not hide behind any sort of theories or models or whatever. Because at the end of the day, you always need to have someone who is willing to put money on the table for something.
Right.
And
sounds pretty simple.
That's it. And you need to understand that very basic relationship.
I think keep it simple. That's a very point to end this episode.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time, Michael. And it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the content, please leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, because we would highly appreciate that to also spread the word about our podcast and show. Next week, we will already be back with a new episode with Michael Friedrich, where we talk about competition. Competition is a very delicate subject and also very important in the startup world. Michael has loads of experience how to handle competition and how to actually also beat them. There will be stories that you can just not believe, where Michael and his companies basically fight against the biggest players in their networks, in their areas, in their markets, and actually also won against them. How you can apply this knowledge and also successfully play, as I would call it, chess in the real startup world. This is exactly what you will learn in an all-new episode of Swisspreneur next week.